Well, hello everybody. I am excited to share with you a few thoughts about our upcoming Viva Italia program, which will actually be the very first classical program that we played in the Riverview Theater in over 2 years. Well, for a live audience, let's say. And that's really, in the end, what it's all about, making music for you and with you there. So we really hope that you will join us for this program, which is going to have some wonderfully joyful music from Rossini and Mendelssohn, and then a very serious and profound piano concerto by Beethoven, featuring the talents of a young pianist named Simon Karakulidi, who was the 2019 gold medalist for the Wideman piano competition, and we're going to be speaking with him a little bit later on in this video. But I wanted to share with you a couple thoughts about the first and last pieces on the program. Those are the ones that give the program its Viva Italia name. We have to open a work by an Italian composer and to close a work called the Italian Symphony by a German composer. Both of these, by the way, by very young composers. In fact, Rossini was 21 when he wrote the opera L'Italiana in Algeri, the Italian woman in Algiers, from which this overture is drawn. And I could tell you a little bit about the opera, but that's not as important as just noting a few details about Rossini's style that you will hear in spades in this overture. First of all, it begins very quietly with some just gently plucked strings, slowly and softly. In fact, I can hardly imagine that the audiences in Rossini's day even heard the opening of this overture. From everything that we know about the decorum of audiences in those days, there was probably a lot of talking and a lot of milling around going on. So I have a feeling that they didn't even hear anything until about the 30th or 45th second or so, when there's a very loud chord that kind of comes out of nowhere. That probably got people's attention. Maybe caused them to perhaps sit down. Then an oboe enters with a gently just wafting note that is suspended and then begins to kind of twist and turn a little bit. But the whole character of this opening is very quiet, calming, kind of relaxing. And then things kind of come to a stop. And then we're sort of off to the races with a lot of energy, some very sharp, short chords, sometimes syncopated, after which we hear some rather lively and rather virtuosic writing for the woodwinds, especially the flutes and oboe. But in particular, you will hear Rossini's kind of trademark way of building energy, which is called a Rossini Crescendo. And that is, well, crescendo, of course, as you probably know, is an enlarging of the volume of music, but it can take on other elements as well, including instrumentation. So Rossini typically begins one of his crescendi with just some low-pitched instruments playing and not very fast. And then as time goes on, every 8 bars, for example, he will add some additional instruments. Just the addition of their sound will tend to make the total sound louder, of course. But then he will also say, go from piano to mezzo forte, and play louder and louder as you go along. But not only this, he also raises the pitch. So we start kind of low in pitch, and then he adds higher and brighter sounding instruments as we go along. And very importantly, he increases the what's called the surface rhythm of the music. So he might begin by having basses and cellos, for example, play yum bum 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 bum. A little bit later, he'll add some other instruments playing yup, and then finally, and if you notice, my hand here is not moving any faster, so the basic underlying tempo doesn't change. We don't speed up, but there's a sense of getting faster because the animation that we hear on the surface is faster. It feels like things are kind of bubbling almost to a boil, and it works. It's an effect that lots and lots of composers have copied over the years. It's one that you will recognize because it's just so commonly used, and you probably know his overture to Barbara of Seville as well, even if you don't know this particular overture. But I hope you enjoy it. It's I think a really charming and just happy way to begin an opera, or in this case, to begin a concert. Now we are closing our program with the Symphony Number 4, so-called Italian Symphony by Felix Mendelssohn. So Mendelssohn was a German composer, and like Rossini, he was very accomplished very young. In fact, you might say he was perhaps the greatest child prodigy composer ever. I mean, greater even, I would say, than Mozart. His octet for strings, one of the real gems of the chamber music repertoire, was written at the age of 16. At the age of 17, he wrote his overture to Midsummer Night's Dream, which is, again, another sort of piece of perfection. To have that kind of mastery over one's craft at that age is, well, I think he is unique in the history of music in that regard. And this Italian symphony then, written by Mendelssohn when he was between 21 and 23, you'd have to say a mature work already by that stage in his life. Now, he took a 10-month trip to Italy and spent time in Rome and in Naples and in Milan and in Venice, and really just drank in the Italian culture, but he also drank in the Italian weather. He wrote to his sister, Fanny, that the sky was just the bluest thing he'd ever seen, and that he was composing the most joyful music that he had ever written. In fact, he sometimes described the opening of this symphony, the first movement, as being blue sky in A major. And it really just feels that way. It opens with a chord played by the strings, who play a plucked chord, and then the woodwinds come in with a just kind of almost like chirping sound, up in the high register. The piece just kind of springs to action right away, and then the violins come in with a theme, which is a kind of leaping feel to it. First twice, and then even higher the next time. It just feels like there's a spring in your step. And you can imagine this young man growing up in Northern Europe, where the clouds are kind of a regular feature of the climate, to be down in Italy where it's warm, where it's sunny, where there's some tasty food. He was clearly having a good time, and you hear it in this music. It's just joyful. It's just, that's what it is. The second movement was the one that he came to last. It's the slow movement, I guess you would say, although it's not terribly slow. He wrote to his sister, well, I haven't figured out the slow movement yet, but I'm waiting for Naples. So when he was in Naples, he in particular was impressed with some of the religious processions that he saw. And I think you can hear in this slow movement a reflection of that kind of stately scene that he must have witnessed. So this one is in D minor, opens with a kind of unison thing. But then the low strings begin this kind of walking bass line, you might say. And so while that is being played by the low strings, we have the violas and the oboe and the bassoon intoning that theme that I just played, this sort of slow, rather stately and relaxed melody over this, just really a walking theme. So I think you get a sense of maybe the pageantry that he would have been witnessing in Naples. The third movement is, I just think, just a kind of joyful minuet and trio. Not particularly Italianate. In fact, we're getting to the Italian stuff, in particular in the last movement. But this one begins. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But there is a middle section that a trio, which feels a little bit like some of his kind of woodland, mysterious music from Midsummer Night's Dream. the sound of the horns and the bassoons, giving us that kind of little bit darkness of that sort of chord back and forth that I just played for you there. And then finally, in the last movement, finally we have, I guess, something that's true, in a sense, truly Italian. He called it a saltarello, a jumping kind of dance, basically, which is very quick and full of energy. Now, we begin in A major, as I said. He's called it Blue Sky in A major. But we end in A minor, this last movement, which is really unusual. I mean, symphonies up to this point, and really even to today, typically they have a journey to them, which is that they begin in darkness and they will end in kind of radiance and light, going from minor to major. I think of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is in C minor and then blazing C major at the end. So Mendelssohn does the opposite. He starts in A major and he ends in A minor. But somehow this last movement is not sad music, you know. It's just energetic, and it's full of life, like the opening is, but in a kind of different way, in a much more maybe rustic way. It just begins with a kind of arpeggio. That kind of bursts onto the scene, and then which is so fast I can't even play it on the piano the way it would be played on the violin with just a repeated note. In fact, it almost sounds like a little snare drum. And the woodwinds come in. And they have a lot to do in this concert with again, kind of lively, fast figuration. So a little bit later on in this movement, there is another idea that is joined, and that is actually a tarantella, which is another kind of dance, often in 6/8, but this one, it feels that way basically. It's in 4 with triplets, but in any case, it has the same energy as the saltarella, but we really have two different kinds of dances on top of each other, you might say. The tarantella, by the way, is a dance that takes its name from the supposed bite of the tarantula and the spasms that it induces in its victims. So it's frantic, but you will hear that kind of speed and as I said, energy in this last movement. So it's a piece that probably lasts not quite a half an hour in total, but it takes us on a little, not so much a travelogue kind of experience with Mendelssohn. It's more of an emotional journey, I suppose you might say. And it's a piece that, in spite of its popularity, he was never quite satisfied with. He finished, as I said, he wrote it while he was in Italy, mostly, although he finished it when he went back to Berlin, and then it didn't get a performance until he was invited to go to London and play with what was called the Royal Philharmonic Society. He brought that there, and it was incredibly popular and very, very successful, but he didn't care for it much. Wanted to revise it. In fact, he made some revisions to 3 of the 4 movements, and it was never published during his lifetime. It wasn't, I think, performed in Germany, I think, until after he died in 1851 or so. So it's interesting to think that a piece this brilliant and this clearly winning and popular didn't somehow meet his standards. We may not know what he saw for this piece in its greatest form, that we never had a chance to see from him. But the version that we have is awfully good. So I hope that you will enjoy it, and look forward to seeing you at our performance on March 5th. So we're delighted to welcome pianist Simon Karakulidi as our guest soloist for the 3rd piano concerto of Ludwig van Beethoven. Simon, as you probably know, was the gold medal winner in the Wideman competition back in 2019. We normally would have had him here last season, but we didn't really have a typical season. So we're delighted to have him join us for this concert. Simon, first of all, tell us a little bit about what you have been doing since the Wideman competition happened.
Well, all sorts of things, starting from trading stocks to considering to change my career a few times. But
I understand.
Yeah, but so I moved to New Haven, which I enjoy. Frank Sinatra famously was ordering pizza whenever he was in New York City from New Haven. So it probably arrived cold. So I actually don't eat pizza really that much, but just to give some. Yeah. So I'm in New Haven. I'm almost done with it, and we'll see what's going to happen after that.
You're doing a master's there, yeah?
Master's, yeah. So there are thoughts. Well, I have thoughts about going to Europe, but now that's something there.
So this performance, you mentioned just a moment ago to me that you'd played a couple times with orchestra this season, maybe?
That's right. I played in Springfield, Missouri, which I think is a wonderful organization, by the way. It was perfectly organized. Just as perfectly as here. Just to clarify. And I also played in Louisville, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. So it was Prokofiev 2, with which I actually won this competition.
Right.
So it's the third time this year, and I think it's the last time, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk just for a moment about this piece, because you mentioned Prokofiev II, which is the piece with which you won the competition a couple of years ago. A totally different kind of, just piece, technique, and so on. When you play Beethoven was, as we know, a brilliant pianist. How does his music fit under the hand, this kind of thing?
You know, the thing is, I actually have a quite strong opinion about it. I think, by the way, that's interesting, that Prokofiev and Beethoven, in a similar way, I don't think they should fit. I think they wrote in a way that should be uncomfortable, and should sound uncomfortable a bit. You should struggle through the music, and maybe then struggle through it and get to some sort of light. We talked about it in the radio interview. This particular concerto is not considered to be the most demanding concerto in the piano repertoire, technically speaking. But this also creates a challenge. So how do we make it sound so that so that it doesn't sound easy? That's and the thing is, there are pianists who record it in a way that it sounds easy, and I think it betrays the music. It's the quite stereotypical, and I don't mean it negatively. Stereotypical Beethoven heroic. Kind of message that's delivered there. Of course, with a constant oscillation between bright and dark, also sophisticated and banal. I think I can hear it in this concerto.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that it needs to sound a little bit difficult, and I don't know I'm not sure if you mean technically difficult. But I said this last night to the orchestra as we were just brushing up a couple of places, that it needs to, it shouldn't be, these little quick eighth notes cannot be trivial, I think. Bum, 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 as opposed to yum, bum, 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 bum. To me anyway, because there's a certain kind of just intensity and stateliness to
resistance. Of course it didn't mean technically it should be perfect. But spiritually that it should feel like it's hard to move to the next note, even though you do it successfully. And with 8 notes, the interesting thing is that you need to combine the Viennese lilt, the famous Viennese lilt, that especially then later in Schubert we find a lot. And in Beethoven, so for instance, something like the second theme, well, it's not the second theme, it's the B section of the rondo, the third movement. So, there is a specific Viennese way of playing it, which with shortening the first note, so as opposed to
right.
And there are many things like that. So it's a combination of incredible struggle with Viennese elegance.
Yeah. Maybe at different times and in different movements for different reasons.
Of course.
Let's talk about this second movement, though. It's so it's out of a different world. We are in this very kind of dark and serious C minor. First of all, I love. Let's just say you come out of the cadenza at the end of the first movement. And it doesn't just sort of sum up things the way a lot of times we have in the Mozart concerto, for example. We have the timpani, boom, 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 and you're playing this arpeggio. It's really wonderful. And then you play those scales like you did at the very beginning. But anyway, then we go from C minor to E major, which is very far removed tonally, and to me, just like a dream world or something like this. It's a very relaxed and almost out of tempo kind of moment.
And also, there is a little technical thing, but that's so important that I want to say that when you imagine about C minor triad, going to E major triad, it's just it all diverges like that with the notes, and it's a kind beautiful effect, really, if you think about it this way. It's not just a random key that's about C minor, but it's like the composer found the crack in C minor, and then he just opens it up. So
Okay. I like that. Yeah. And these are things you might not necessarily be consciously aware of, but you somehow you feel
Definitely.
it. As you're listening. Let's see. You are playing the Cadenza that Beethoven himself, when he first played this, he would have improvised it, we presume. But you're playing the version that he then later wrote out. In the first one.
It's so hard to imagine Beethoven improvising, because he had the reputation of this guy who would cross the sketch 10,000 times, and even though I'm sure when he improvised, it was on the basis of something that he pretty decided before that. I can't imagine. I don't think he was like, I don't know, kind of jazz jam kind of session improvisation. No, but.
He was definitely meticulous. This fellow. I mean, he's referring to the fact that there are Beethoven sketchbooks, as opposed to some composers we know of. Mozart comes to mind, who apparently mostly wrote in a final version almost every time he wrote. Beethoven wrestled over every phrase, every motive. It seemed pieces would take him years and years just to get quite right. And then I see that is a contrast, you would say, to somebody who could just sort of sit down and toss something off. So you're probably right that he had, even though it was the details of it, every last detail maybe hadn't been figured out. The big shape of it, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt. And then this cadenza, I actually don't know any other cadenzas to be fair. I really like it.
Some people, I mean, you can write your own, I suppose, but most people play this because it just. Because he wrote it, and it seems to fit.
And in those concertos like Mozart, some of them don't have cadenzas. And by the way, not all Mozart cadenzas are very good too. So you have to write your own. And it's always a big question. So are you going to go for this kind of continuation of music into the future, and meaning you're going to write a cadenza in the style of contemporary music? So, for instance, the Rossini cadenza for the C minor Mozart concerto, which is, by the way, the foundation for.
Yes, that's true.
But those arpeggios that you talked about, that's identical arpeggios in the end of the first movement of Mozart. And so either you're going to do this, or you're going to stylize it. But with Beethoven, we don't really need to struggle with those ideas, because he wrote to all five, I think. I think fifth concerto doesn't have a cadenza, I think. Yes, so it's four.
Right.
He wrote it down.
Well, nonetheless, it gives us, some sense of, what his improvisatory style may have been, I guess, as he's written down improvisatory style. Well, we're really looking forward to this.
Me too.
And now I'll mention at the concert itself the fact that you're also playing more Beethoven the next day at the chamber concert, but
Also C minor.
Hey, very, very thoughtful.
I know.
You're playing Opus 111.
Opus 1, which is the last sonata.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Well, a wonderful weekend of music ahead, and delighted to be able to share it with you. So thank you
I'm looking forward
for taking some time to speak with us here today.
Okay. Thank you.